Melania Chiponda is a human rights defender and energy justice advocate based in Harare, Zimbabwe. She has worked for decades challenging exploitative mining projects and their impacts on communities, especially women in rural areas. She is currently the director of the SHINE Collab, which works at the intersection of gender and energy justice to create community-driven, renewable, just energy solutions. As a leader in the feminist energy space, she has consistently raised her voice on the issue of critical minerals and human rights as part of just transition conversations, something we were eager to learn more from her about.
One thing that I have always appreciated about your analysis of a gender just transition is that it is so rooted in your understanding of the lived experiences of communities most impacted by the climate crisis and transition minerals mining. Can you tell us more about Bakita in particular and why this story is so important to your advocacy around a just transition?
The story of Bikita is very critical, particularly at this moment when the whole world is talking about transitioning from fossil fuels driven development to renewable energy. Bikita is hosting the biggest lithium find in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe has the largest lithium deposits on the continent and being the sixth in the whole world. And therefore, the extraction of lithium has intensified. And when we talk about, for example, the women in Bikita looking at things differently, it's not because they don't like energy. They definitely love to have renewable energy services, and they desperately need energy for their livelihoods, for their household chores, and for their primary healthcare services, for their educational facilities. They all need energy, and their hope for energy lies in decentralized renewable energy. But the challenge now is that lithium is being extracted in ways which are extremely harmful to ecosystems, to women's bodies, to women's well-being, taking away women's dignity, and taking away the sense of community. And I'll explain why. Lithium needs so much water. That's the first thing. It needs a lot of water. And then the mining also takes place on community territories. And in Bikita, we do have a tribal group, the Batombe people of Anyanya. This is a group that has stayed in the same area for more than 300 years. And now they are facing dispossession not only of their lands, but as well of their water bodies. And looking at how lithium is driving the energy transition, we see how the issue of justice has been left behind. Because when we think of justice, we are supposed to use an intersectional lens and look at how does transitioning to renewables impact on different groups differently. And when we use that lens, then we start thinking about this community that I've just shared, the community of Anyanya. This is a community that has stayed on the same piece of land for 300 plus years. They have their sacred sites, they have their ancestral graves, they have a deep connection with their land. And therefore, this is a group that we are supposed to look at and consider how myself, someone who is a Zimbabwean, definitely affected by the extraction of lithium, but not at the same level like the communities that are hosting the lithium and the communities that have lived in that area there for centuries. And now the failure of the transition process to take into consideration that yes, we do need to transition, but how do we protect the rights, the dignity, the well-being of the communities that are hosting the critical minerals that are needed in the renewable energy sector? And also just asking a simple question like, can we ensure justice to the people who are on the other extreme end of the energy system and not doing justice at this level, at the level of extraction? extractivism is extremely unjust and it is extremely destructive to both humans and the planet and to the next generations as well. And what is going on right now is that we are replacing extractivism that was driven by fossil fuels by decarbonization extractivism, but the idea remains the same. And so I think as we are talking about critical minerals, how do we ensure that we mine the minerals after getting consent from the affected communities, respecting their human rights, their human dignity, respecting the rights of those who are the most vulnerable, and also making sure that they have access to energy. That is the most critical. We cannot extract lithium and then the community that has been hosting the lithium cannot afford the lithium batteries. They cannot afford the very basic of the technologies that are coming from the minerals that they are hosting. So there should be a mechanism to ensure that justice starts from the extraction point.
Thank you, Mela. That was so wonderfully illustrative of really what is at stake around energy transition process questions. And it's the thing that no one wants to talk about. It's the thing that is part of this global production of trade and extraction and exploitation, where human rights abuses are just as possible with renewable energy minerals mining as it is with fossil fuels. And it's such a clear and critical illustration of where that is at stake. As someone who works in energy justice, I know you probably share the frustration of the binary that is so often put around clean and dirty energy, fossil fuels, renewables, good and bad energy. We know that so-called green or clean energy often still relies on exploitation and human rights abuses, as you were just describing. So can you tell us a bit more about why you find this binary problematic and how we need to really add nuance to our assessment of what actually goes into creating renewable energy?
This binary is problematic because we are not questioning the system. The moment we do not question structural violence, then it means the difference is the same. And I worry so much when people talk about, counting the carbon footprint. It's okay. We're counting our footprint and we are really following up on how can we make sure that, we offset our carbon, our emissions. But for me, the biggest question is why are we not tracking the harmful extraction that is happening? And I know that this is uncomfortable. This is a very uncomfortable conversation to say, hey, here we are. We are using these gadgets. We have renewable energy in our homes, but let us start tracking where they came from. Let us look at the violence that is happening in the DR Congo, and therefore asking ourselves critical questions like, is this clean energy? When we talk about clean energy, I do not want to look at it as it's either or. It's just either this is a fossil fuels or this is renewable energy, because we need to address the structural injustice. We need to address a system that will ensure that the people who have access to energy now, who have access to fossil fuels driven energy, continue having energy after the transition, right? That the transition becomes very technological, that we are just replacing the technologies. But a just transition is not about a technology only. A just transition is supposed to look at a whole array of rights, of entitlements, and also taking the duty bearers to account. Because the moment we start thinking in binaries, then it means we are not going to question the violations. We are not going to question the dispossession. We are not going to question why people are continuing in energy poverty as we are transitioning. So I sometimes think that we need to to redefine justice, to redefine it, because so many times justice has become a tick boxing thing, like a tick boxing process. And we have seen how justice has been incorporated in the most unjust systems. And it is because we are thinking about it as either or. And the moment we start doing that, it means very harmful extraction processes that are taking place at the backs of indigenous women without power. We are going to tick box and say that, oh, as long as we are transitioning, as long as we are moving away from fossil fuels, then we have transitioned. We are transitioned because we're in a climate crisis, right? That is the main reason why we need to transition, because we are facing a crisis that is not only like a climate crisis, but an ecological crisis. We are facing a debt crisis. We are facing an economic crisis, a global economic crisis. We are facing so many crises. We are facing conflicts. We are facing the crisis of militarization, of mining territories. And therefore, the issue of, let us just talk about moving away from fossil fuels to renewables, it falls off if that transition is going to take place in militarized zones. It falls off when that transition is taking place at the backs of women who are struggling without energy access. Just like currently, we are talking about Africa having, out of the 685 million people across the world without access to energy, 600 million are in Africa. And then most of them are living in rural areas. And we all know how most of the rural areas in Zimbabwe are hosting the critical minerals. And these are the areas where the communities often do not have voice, particularly women do not have voice. And therefore, how do we do justice? Because even if they would have voice, they're silenced. They're silenced. And therefore, I think we should go beyond just looking at the transition as a technological transition, right? And for me, the big question is, before we even start talking about a transition, why are we not asking ourselves, why is it that we have 600 million without access to energy in Africa? Why do we have that number? What necessitated that? What is the problem? That is what is supposed to be addressed now, before we even talk about, let us transition in ways which are supposedly just. And for me, energy should be considered as the commons, as part of the commons, not a commodity. It should be treated as a right, as you know, it is the commons and everyone should have access to it. It should not be a reserve for people who can afford it, because it is very critical for people's health, for people's well-being, for people's dignity. And also, if we center care, then it means even going beyond just, the issue of the human rights, but also to look at even the psychological, the emotional trauma that women face because of energy poverty, how their health is impacted as well. And also looking at addressing the historical injustices when we are talking about the issue of transitioning. So it's not an either or. It's not an either or. We need to address the structural injustice.
One of the strategies that you talk a lot about at SHINE is putting energy directly into women's hands. Can you talk about why this very practical step around ownership and delivery of energy services is so important, especially in the context, as you're speaking about, of unequal access to energy and many other resources?
Sometimes at SHINE, when we have meetings in communities, we often talk about, why is it we are talking about putting energy into women's hands when It is already in women's hands. We only see women as users of energy, but we are not looking at how they manage the energy resources at household level and as well at community level. And why we do not acknowledge this critical role that they play, it is because we invisibilize the work that is being done by women. It is invisible. But when we look at who is managing our energy systems, who is making sure, just putting your plate of food on the table, and then thinking about the process that happened before that food was on the table, we see how women were managing energy systems, women were managing the food systems, women were managing the water, women were managing everything. And then I then go to ask myself, so why is it that when it comes to institutions, they want to treat women as just users and not having to make decisions about energy systems, but they do make decisions on energy systems at household level and at community level. And what is really like interesting is seeing how people go to make decisions in cities about energy systems when they are coming from backgrounds where the energy systems where they grew up were managed by women. And so there is this whole pretense of women living in rural areas, they don't know these technologies, they don't, but women had been managing technologies for very long. And it doesn't matter what kind of technologies, but they had been managing technologies for very long. And that women are excluded from decision-making processes in the energy sector. It is deliberate. It is deliberate because energy is power. Not only power in terms of the power that we see as the bulb or the power that we see as the energy that we are using, but the power as in the power to make decisions, the power that is perfected in the institutions, including the patriarchy as part of the system within institutions. And therefore, the idea of sharing power is something that we only see mostly in communities, in indigenous people, where power is not vested in one person or in one institution, but power is shared. But within a neoliberal capitalist agenda, power is not supposed to be shared because it is power. And therefore, the failure by the energy institutions, systems, not to have women being part of the decision making and the policy making processes, it is just a power issue. It is because they are not considering women as having, in quotes, I will say this in quotes, as having the technical expertise. And let me just give you one practical example, right? When Zimbabwe was in the process of coming up with their Zimbabwe National Renewable Energy Policy, that was the time that I was studying. I was doing my PhD and I was working with women, right? I was working with women using feminist participatory action research with women who are living energy poverty. And guess where I was getting all these policy recommendations? I was getting them from the women. I was getting every time when I would go to the energy ministry and when I would meet together with the other NGOs, all the recommendations I was giving were coming from the women, not from women in academia, no. They were just coming from women in the communities where we were sitting down and where we were talking. Storytelling circles were necessitating that process of coming up with policy recommendations. And for me, it's proven it works. And this is where now SHINE is coming from. And We had a meeting last year as the SHINE Collab. We brought together the women-led power enterprises and the women from Bikita and women from other communities who are living in energy poverty. When they came together, they were discussing about what they need. And one thing that came out of that meeting was that women in rural areas, they know that they suffer from financial exclusion. And what do they have? They have village banks. They call them village banks. Of course, there is the vernacular name for it, but they have their village banks where they bring their money together, their resources together, and they lend each other monies at an interest, right? And they even have their savings club. The village bank is something separate. Their savings clubs is something separate. And from those savings clubs, the women in Bikita, in communities, they buy some solar-powered pumps and they repair their solar-powered boreholes and they use them as a community. And now, tell me why women are not in decision-making processes when they are already making decisions at that level. Tell me why they shouldn't be in policy-making processes when they are coming up with solutions that work. They are coming up with solutions that work, and therefore, us as SHINE, we continue giving voice to those demands by women that, we are already in the decision-making processes, whether you want to acknowledge that or not, but we are. And we are able to make decisions not based on theory, but on our lived experiences as women, by our lived realities as women, and the solutions that we come up with, they would work. The policy recommendations that we come up with, they work. And this is why SHINE is grounded in the communities and working with the communities. Someone said, you need to make a business case. I said, communities already have a business case because they have their savings, where they put their resources, and they have it. They have it. What we need to do is to make that visible, and that is what we are doing at SHINE. Make that visible.
We know that there are frontline communities all over the world who, like Bakita, are facing the impacts of critical minerals mining without sharing in any of the benefits, especially across the global south and the continent of Africa. Can you tell us more about the work you're doing to connect these communities and with women who are challenging these mining realities across their different contexts? What are you hearing? What are you learning?
I just want to bring in the very important work we are doing, that in August we are looking forward to be having a convening that is going to bring together communities, but also not communities. Because what we say to ourselves is we also need to bring our friends and partners in civil society and in NGOs and even the women-led power enterprises. We need to come together because this is a learning space for everybody. And it is a learning space even for people in NGOs to know the realities of communities who are hosting critical minerals. That as we talk about let us transition, we are also talking about the how part. How do we transition in ways that are going to be anti-extractivist, that are not extractivist? How are we going to transition in ways which are not harmful, right? And so what we do is we bring together communities in person and online as well. This year in March, we had our webinar. And in our webinar, we were at a place where we brought community members to go and share with the international NGOs and everyone, wherever they were. There were people coming from so many countries to listen to the story of Bikita. And we also have people that were tuning in from South Africa, where we are working together with our partner Earth Life, with communities who are impacted by the mine closures. And their voice was heard everywhere. And in that, we also had communities that are in the DR Congo. And creating those spaces, it creates this space of solidarity, this space of learning in powerful ways, which is not textbook learning. And I'm saying not textbook learning in the sense that we use feminist popular education. As SHINE, we use feminist popular education in all our interventions because we want to ensure that our processes are participatory, that I don't go there and say, I'm going to teach you what human rights are, because communities know about human rights already. And the way that they conceptualize the human rights may be different from the way that I'm conceptualizing, but the underlying issue is the same. And therefore, that when we bring communities together, communities from Kenya who are affected by geothermal mining, communities, for example, in Lake Turkana who are affected by the wind farms, just them being in the same space, they share struggles, they share solutions, they learn from each other, they exchange learnings. And that as well comes together with the work that we are doing, piloting the renewable energy services that we are imagining, right? We said as SHINE, we don't want to continue theorizing about communities. We don't want to continue just writing about the community struggles. We want to pilot what the community is saying. What they're saying, let's put it into practice. Let's see if this can be replicated. Let us see how we can multiply this. Let us see how this can be an opportunity to learn. If we would pilot what the communities are imagining, because communities are imagining food processing using renewable energy services. They are imagining every household having energy for lighting. They are imagining their health centers having energy, the refrigeration, and all that for the vaccinations. They are imagining maternal health care, that is healthcare facilities that are electrified. And for us, we are saying, let us pilot and see how this looks like. And let us learn from that. What are we learning? And how can this be replicated? Of course, taking into consideration the context and how this can be refined. And for me, it goes to what we always talk about within the feminist movement. We are always talking about feminist economies. And then I say to myself, these are feminist economies because these are economies that are run by women, controlled by women, where women make the decisions, and where women are building local economies that are climate resilient and that are climate just. And therefore, why not create spaces for learning? Why not create spaces to imagine how the mining of critical minerals can go beyond just, we have the UN framework on critical minerals. Yes, we do have, but is it adequate to ensure that corporations and governments are taken into account? Is it adequate? And how do we make these mandatory and not some corporate social responsibility and political grandstanding by corporations and by governments? How do we go beyond that? How do we make sure that those frameworks which are developed at the level of the UN actually are something that can work for the communities? And how do we refine that? Because this is a framework, right? And that has to be contextualized within communities. And how do we contextualize that without saying, oh, this is a one size fits all? Everything has to fit within this UN framework. So SHINE is doing quite a lot of work in even generating some resources that communities can use, by making sure that when we interact with the communities, we share what is going on at global level. That UN framework on critical minerals, we were sharing with the community in Bikita. And of course, they were asking questions like, so if they would abuse our rights, are they going to be prosecuted? Who is going to be prosecuted? And asking questions like, if they cannot be prosecuted, what is the point of this framework? Like, and these are very critical questions that communities are asking and that we need to learn from. And also, when we engage with these multilateral institutions, let us pose those questions that communities are posing from the work that we are doing with communities. Let us take that. And also, for me, it even goes beyond just saying what the communities are saying, but going to the COP with the community from Bikita. Let them come face to face with the corporations, with the governments, and tell their story.